All right. So thanks everyone for attending today. This is our first lunchtime webinar for our group for a little while. My name's Sally Day. I'm the project officer with the Greta Valley Landcare Group, and I've been privileged to work on this project with Dr. Scott Raymond for the last 3 years. And I think we've formed a really great alliance for working together and achieving some great on-ground outcomes. So Scott, thank you for coming along. Scott is a freshwater ecologist, and he's worked with the Arthur Rylah Institute in Melbourne for the last 15 years. He specialises in works around river restoration, and crayfish, I think, is his new area of interest, as well as these lovely little Southern Pygmy Perch. Scott's PhD was in environmental toxicology, so he's got a great set of skills to work on this project for us. And what I might do is request that everyone turns their videos off except for Scott, and I'll turn my video off, and then we'll get started. Now we've got the chat function down the bottom. If at any point during the presentation you have a question for Scott, please submit it via the chat function, and we'll either pause and address it at that point, or we might do a big open session at the end. So that should be great. So I will hand over to you, Scott, and thanks for being with us.
Thanks, Sally. Thanks, everyone. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge my co-authors, being Geordie, Sally, Kelvin, and Simon Castanelia. I'd also like to thank all of our project partners, of which there are many, and especially all of the landholders involved in the Southern Pygmy Perch project. Today's talk focuses on the role of private farm dams and wetlands in the protection of a threatened small-bodied native fish, Southern Pygmy Perch. On a global scale, we've witnessed an 87% decline in global wetlands, with 80% of the world's large rivers now regulated, posing a significant threat to freshwater habitats and the animals that are reliant on these systems. In Australia, our freshwater systems are characterised by variable stream discharges, extensive regulation, frequent droughts, and increasing pressure from human activities, all of which have contributed to an estimated 90% decline in the abundance of native fish within the Murray-Darling Basin over the last 2 centuries. Approximately 20% of our small-bodied native fish species are threatened, and without intervention, many of these species are expected to become extinct over the next 20 to 30 years. Traditionally, actions to conserve threatened species have included habitat protection, such as exclusion fencing, habitat creation, such as re-snagging rivers and waterways, and the hatchery rearing and stocking of small-bodied native fish, as well as conservation translocations, which is what we're going to be talking about today. The human-mediated movement of living organisms within their known range is referred to as conservation translocation. These translocations are a widely recognised strategy and have been used effectively in Australia to re-establish threatened fish species, including trout cod, Macquarie perch, southern purple-spotted gudgeon, barred galaxids, and the Murray hardyhead. Next, I would just like to outline our 8-step translocation process using Southern Pygmy Perch as an example. So all of these ideas that formulate these processes have come from our own work and from the work from the IUCN International Guidelines for Reintroductions and Conservation Translocations. The first step in the translocation process is to establish a project outline. This helps to clarify your objectives and guide the development of outcomes, which is an IUCN requirement. So for example, in the fish in supplementary habitats project, which started in 2018, as Sally mentioned, we aim to reduce the extinction risk of Southern Pygmy Perch. We're looking at the northern form of Southern Pygmy Perch, which is the threatened genetic form. Our objective was to establish 20 self-sustaining refuge populations in private farm dams across northeastern Victoria. So some of the actions that we used to achieve this were community engagement, site selection, and obviously the collection and translocation of fish to private refugia. Following this, we aim to monitor these populations to determine project success, to relay these findings to the public and to the broader scientific community, and finally to provide recommendations based on our observations. Step 2 is to ensure that you have a solid understanding of your species biology and ecology to identify species-specific threats, in this case, redfin perch predation and declining genetic diversity. Also to develop suitable restoration strategies and to assess how your species is likely to respond to conservation actions. In this case, our target species is the northern or inland form of Southern Pygmy Perch. The Southern Pygmy Perch is a short-lived, small-bodied native fish to the Murray-Darling Basin. Since European colonisation, the species has undergone major declines in range and abundance, and its distribution has been fragmented into small, discrete, reproductively isolated populations, of which there are 12 remaining wild populations in Victoria. Southern Pygmy Perch show a preference for slow-flowing still waters with abundant in-stream vegetation, particularly macrophytes. They're visual predators of micro and macro crustaceans. They become sexually mature at 1 year of age, producing from 50 to 4,000 eggs per female, dependent on size, and they are batch spawners. Breeding between September and December, often into January, and they're cued by temperatures increasing beyond 16 degrees Celsius. However, Southern Pygmy Perch face a number of threats, including predation, predominantly from trout and redfin perch, but also from other large-bodied native fish and in shallowing habitats from birds. They also face threats from pumping, large flood events which wash out macrophytes and fish from their habitats, loss of refugia under drought conditions, damage to riparian and in-stream vegetation, predominantly through cattle, loss of critical habitat, impacts from exotic fish species such as carp that increase the turbidity of the water, thus reducing sunlight, reducing macrophyte growth. Also from eastern gambusia that fin nip and harass small-bodied native fish. One of the other threats is the fragmentation of populations. This fragmentation leads to low genetic diversity. The example that I've used here is that most of our Southern Pygmy Perch populations that reside in upland habitats have a mean effective population size of less than 200 individuals, which means, well, the effective population size is those individuals that are actually contributing to future populations. So you can see here that the upland populations, the genetic diversity is quite low. And in the lowland Murray populations, it's also low, but higher than the upstream populations. The problem with low genetic diversity means that these populations are at risk from inbreeding depression, outbreeding depression, loss of novel genes, and therefore have a reduced capacity to combat changing environmental conditions. Collaboration with the community is the key to project success. This has become evident throughout the whole of the project. So for us, with the Southern Pygmy Perch program, the Greta Valley Land Care Group was the primary organisation we used to find landholders with suitable translocation sites. The Wangaratta Land Care and Sustainability Incorporation also provided assistance in the field and with engaging landholders. So to enhance community participation, we held a workshop at Moyu. You can see the flyer on the right-hand side here. And we held a number of field days prior to and during translocation events. So once we had a list of potential sites, we assessed each of the dams for their suitability as refuge locations for Southern Pygmy Perch. We took detailed notes on dam size, water supply, vegetation, fencing, riparian vegetation, etc. We then scored and ranked the sites in order of most to least suitable. So this ordering allowed us to focus on the best sites first. So therefore we translocated fish into the most suitable sites first. We then set about collecting and moving the fish to their new homes. So our original translocation started with 4 wild populations, and we collected 50% of the adults from those source populations because we didn't want to adversely impact those source populations. So during fish transportation, we added aeration, and we put additives into the water to protect fish from the buildup of ammonia and to maintain their fish slime, which is their external bacterial coating. We measured, acclimated and released fish into farm dams on the day of capture. And just as a little extra note, to maintain fish health, we weighed fish in water. Sounds strange, but we did. And we mixed the source and receiving waters together, shandying from increasing the amount of water in that mixture from the receiving waters, just so that we could acclimate the fish. So step 6 in the translocation process is monitoring. Monitoring is essential for us to determine project success. In our case, successful outcomes include whether our populations have, 1, survived, bred, successfully recruited individuals into the population, and that we have maintained or preferably enhanced the genetic diversity of the population. The second last step was to communicate our findings through client reports, magazines, project videos, fact sheets, workshops, and other interested groups. I think this is evident in Sally's interview this morning on ABC News, which is great. Finally, we provided a number of recommendations to our clients to enhance the conservation of Southern Pygmy Perch. So some of these recommendations include the continuation of monitoring, better alignment of the current program with additional project partners. Something that's really, really important is the mixing of our refuge populations. Because we're only placing 200 individuals into each of the private refugia, we need to ensure that we don't have any adverse genetic implications from those. So we also want to re-establish populations in the wild next year. And because of the genetic implications and some of the hydrological implications that we've had in the past, we think there's a real need to involve both hydrologists and geneticists into the program. We'd also like to assess the impacts of removing individuals from source populations to ensure that we don't have detrimental impacts on populations, on wild populations. And we also think that the use of eDNA in pre-site assessments will only benefit us in the future. The Southern Pygmy Perch Conservation Project has evolved over the past six years from an original workshop held in 2015, project development in 2017, to fish being translocated from 2018 onwards. Unfortunately, we were unable to undertake any translocations in 2020. So 2021 was a huge year for Southern Pygmy Perch and our Southern Pygmy Perch program. We translocated 2,000 pygmy perch, which we collected from farm dams, into an additional 10 farm dams, as well as 2 private wetlands, one being Foster's Lake. During that time, we assessed an additional 8 potential wetland and creek sites for future translocations and for genetic rescue reintroductions into areas where they once occurred, for example, Barmah. This project was only achievable through collaboration with private landholders. So we'd obviously like to thank all of those landholders involved for their generosity and support in conserving this beautiful threatened native fish. In 2022, we aim to establish 20 to 25 Southern Pygmy Perch populations in farm dams in total. So far we have 14. I think the next step for us is to start to move from these farm dams to wild wetland creek refuge habitats. So when we initially started the translocations, we only translocated into dams that were above the 50-year flood level because we didn't want to lose our fish. So over the years, we've slowly reduced that to over the 20-year flood level to 5, and now we're moving into habitats that are inundated annually. Well, we would like to. Another aim is to complete the Southern Pygmy Perch Risk Management Report, which is currently under review. So we're hoping that this report will clarify the way forward in the conservation of Southern Pygmy Perch, and that will give us access to better resources such as hydrologists and geneticists in designing projects to ensure that our populations are healthy. We need to continue to assess and compare source and refuge populations and investigate the genetic aspects of refuge populations. So how can you help? We need more refuge locations. So please let us know if you know somebody or yourselves have a farm dam or wetland with the following characteristics that you can read there. Whilst this is not set in stone, because we have, as I've mentioned here, 20 metre by 20 metre surface area, we do have smaller dams that are absolute crackers. So they have reproduced a lot of Southern Pygmy Perch for us in a few locations. It is important to look at depth. You know, we can't afford to translocate fish into dams that are going to overheat and stress and potentially kill our fish. So dams with fringing and submergent vegetation, particularly filamentous vegetation and macrophytes, they're pretty much a key to their habitat. We'd also like to choose dams that have high water security. We've had a few in the past dry out and with obvious consequences. The preference is for farm dams with a known stocking history so that we can avoid translocating Southern Pygmy Perch into farm dams that have existing populations of carp, redfin perch, golden perch, Murray cod, those sorts of things. Although they do survive in those habitats, they just don't survive well. Habitats with limited stock access. We also have quite a few dams that do have stock drinking water from those dams, which is fine. It's just when it gets to a stage where the fringing habitat is destroyed and turbidity levels increase with follow-on impacts on macrophytes, it just becomes problematic. So if you're interested and you have one of these farm dams, or you know somebody that has, please contact Sally Day from the Greater Valley Landcare and put your hand up. That'd be great. So today's take-home messages are that translocations are a valuable tool for threatened species conservation. There is a real need for us to establish translocation processes and guidelines and protocols to ensure that everybody's doing the same thing. To recognise that community collaboration is the key. So shout out, special thanks to all of our project partners. We couldn't have done it without you. Whilst they seem like they're small-bodied fish, the processes are quite involved, and so are the groups in the project. So thanks very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed it.
Thanks, Scott. That was fantastic. Lots of great photos showing some of our nice sites across the catchment around the way. I'm just going to, we've got a couple of questions in the chat. Margaret's asked, is there a university research partner on the project? And Scott, I might throw to you. Perhaps you'd like to explain the role of the Arthur Rylah Institute to those who don't know about it.
Well, the Arthur Rylah Institute's the premier research institute in Victoria. We work for the state government. We're a part of the state government. We're part of the Department of Environment, Land, Water and Planning. So we undertake fish research. Well, my group, the group that I'm in, we undertake fish research throughout Victoria, and we also have collaborative programs with New South Wales and South Australia and Canberra.
Yep, so it's a fantastic organisation, and they do a broad range of research covering all sorts of different fauna and flora. Like there's a lot of work on. You see webinars on bats and birds and
that's right.
Yeah, post-fire recovery, all sorts of things. Another question about new project funding. So if there's no more questions for Scott at the moment, I might hop on and just have a brief chat about the current funding that we have at the moment. So I'll just stop can you stop sharing, please, Scott? Just stop your screen sharing and then we'll jump across. That's great. So I've just got a couple of short slides just to summarize our current funding that we have. So as Scott mentioned, we've been involved in this project since 2018, and I'd just like to really recognise and thank for their support for the translocations that happened this year in 2021. They were funded by the Australian government through a Communities Environment Program grant, which helped us to put fish into Foster's Lake in Glenrowan. And also a very big thank you to the June Canavan Foundation, who supported the translocations into all of our private farm dams across the Greater Valley catchment. So thank you very much to that philanthropic organisation who have supported the ongoing work for the preservation of this species. So Scott did a great job of summarising what we were looking for, but I'm just going to run over them again so that we get that clear in our minds of the type of sites that we're looking for. So we have just received grant funding from the Northeast CMA, and that's to help us with a 2022 program for this fish. Now we're looking for a secure water supply with a pretty fixed limited variation in level. So dams that have really big rises and falls in the past haven't been successful for us as a group. These dams need to be located in the King River or 15 Mile Creek catchments, just to keep them geographically close so that it's easy for us to go around and move and do monitoring from dam to dam. So with the dams, they can, as Scott mentioned, we're now taking a little bit more of a risky strategy. So these dams don't have to be high and dry up on the floodplain anymore. We are actually looking for sites that are well connected with the floodplain. So, you know, if there's sort of 1 to 2 year flooding events that might overtop your dam and, you know, help naturally deliver some of these fish down into the tributary or the main stem of the King River, that would be something that we would be keen to look at. Very important that there's a good diversity and coverage of aquatic plants. As Scott mentioned, that's critical for them to provide cover, so to avoid predation by birds or other fish if they're in the dam, but also as key habitat for their breeding cycles. Preferably not stocked with native fish like yellowbelly or Murray cod, although as Scott mentioned, we have got a couple of sites where they coexist quite nicely together, but they are in very large dams in that case, where I think everyone seems to find their niche habitat and both populations do well. But definitely no redfin, trout or carp. We don't have budget under the current program to do carp removal, certainly not on a large scale. So that may preclude some sites from the program. So although we'd love to get a list of more sites, because we're always looking for opportunities for additional funding, at this stage we'll try and pick the best 6 to 10 sites to tackle for next year. We would prefer sites that are fenced from stock access, but that's not a prerequisite. We do have some funding for on-ground works, so we can actually help to support the establishment of off-stream watering. We have fencing and we have some funding available for revegetation. And so for the right sites in the right locations, we can actually work one-on-one with the landholder to develop a really good plan for those sites and get them happening as a future translocation site. The timeline for our program is that we really need to look at doing the fencing and establishing the off-stream watering over this coming summer and autumn, and having sites prepared so that we can move into next winter, sort of June or July of next year, and start to plant those out. And the revegetation is not actually just limited to trees and shrubs on the surrounding land around the dam, but we can actually also start to supply some aquatic plants to improve diversity of aquatic plants in the dam itself. So sites will be ranked. We will do a short list of those best sites that are put forward, and I'll come out and have some discussions with landholders and have a really good look at them. And then Scott and I will sit down and rank the sites in order of probably the best habitat for the Southern Pygmy Perch. And then we'll get in touch and get that process happening with the landholder. Funding has to be wrapped up and our sites have to be finished by November 22. So it's a full 12 months from now really to start developing plans. And we'd probably look to move the fish at a similar time of year that we did this year, which was a late winter translocation. Scott, do you think that's reasonable, like a September, October sort of period, or would we go earlier than that?
I think August, September proved to be really, well, it just seemed to work really, really well for us. There was those fish that we got were so healthy. They were just starting to move into breeding condition as well. So I think that's probably the best time to move them.
And look, with the monitoring that was done this year when Scott and Geordie moved these fish, they were pulling out fish that were measuring really long, up to, what was your biggest, Scott?
97 mil.
97 millimeters. So the literature up till now quotes the maximum size for these fish of about 85 millimeters. And we have a couple of very productive dams, and this one was up at Hansonville, and there was some regular measurements of 95 millimeters and above that were coming out of that sample. So it was very clear to me as a non-fish expert that we had some very fat, pregnant looking females that were carrying a lot of eggs that were shifted from those sites into our sites that we did this year. So I think that a similar timing for us would work really well. So my contact details are there by email or phone, and there's a lot of information on our website at www.greenerlandcare.org.au about the projects. There's a nice little video that Scott referred to in his presentation as well, which summarises the work that we've been doing as a group. So I'm going to stop sharing my presentation again, and I hope that clarifies for everyone a bit more about the available funding. We do have another question here that's come through from Stuart. Are there any other fish that are being looked at to extend this translocation process? And I think that's a really great question for you, Scott.
Yeah, well, there's quite a few other species and that are currently being looked at, and that they include Murray hardyhead. I think I outlined them in the talk, some of the translocation processes that have been really successful, including the Murray hardyhead. So we've got the pygmy perch, we've got barred galaxids, we've got catfish, although they're starting to move into the medium-sized fish. What else have we got? Yeah, look, there are quite a few other species that people are looking at translocating. The Southern Pygmy Perch is our big one. I think South Australia and the North Central CMA, Peter Rose is running. They're looking at southern purple spotted gudgeons, and we've also got a collaborative project between Sally, myself, and Pete to translocate some catfish into northeastern Victoria.
So it's great. I think from my point of view, we've had really excellent engagement with our landholders, because often these farms are sitting there and they might be not used in a productive sense. So, you know, using them for habitat for a threatened fish has been a real win-win for us. And so I think it's a really keen, there's a lot of interest in this space, and down the track it would be fantastic if we could move to look to do other species in sites, if this looks like an ongoing sort of program that could be, you know, developed over a greater area. So I would encourage anyone with a site that's suitable to get in touch with me, and then we can talk to Scott further about whether that site is going to meet the needs of these little fish. And I just before we go, is there any other questions for Scott around the ecology or habitat needs or breeding for this fish? There's nothing else that's come through in the chat. So looks like you've done a good job at addressing our questions, Scott.
I haven't actually answered Margaret's. I've just brought the chats up now. We don't have a university partnership at the moment, unfortunately. That would be a really good avenue for us to look into. I have had discussions with Luciano Berigati. He's a geneticist in South Australia. So he came along to another talk that I did for ANGFA on Southern Pygmy Perch, and he gave me a couple of really, really good ideas. So I think that would be a really beneficial avenue for us to pursue. Yeah.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you. As we don't have any more questions at the moment, we'll say thank you, and I'll stop the recording, and we will make a recording of this available for everyone to watch and come back to later. We've just had another late question. Is there any impact on frogs, from Matt? And Scott, this is a good question, because these little Southern Pygmy Perch are carnivorous. So can we expect them to eat tadpoles in farm dams and frogs for that?
I hope this is, I can only see the name Matt. I hope this is Matt West. I assume it is. We don't know. Short answer, we have not looked into that. So that Matt's from University of Melbourne, and so that's a potential opportunity for us to, you know, build in some more collaboration with the universities to answer those kinds of questions.
And I think I've also had a comment from Stu Little about great to see expansion into floodplain dams that may contribute to natural populations. And I think this is where our programs moved to. In 2018, we were very fixed on making sure we had, you know, populations that were safe and secure, that we could breed them in and actually just keep them as a safe refuge population. And fast forward 3 or 4 years, and Scott's really keen to take an approach where we start to look at how we can naturally get these fish back out into the wild. So our approach is constantly changing and constantly under review, but it is certainly where we're moving to, which is a fantastic to see. One last question: turtles, do they predate the pygmy perch? Will they eat the fish, Scott?
Yes, they do.
Yes, they do.
They do. But look, Southern Pygmy Perch have been around for a long time, and they've cohabitated with frogs, turtles, large-bodied native fish predators, and even more recently introduced exotic predators and competitors. So whilst we have a fairly good understanding that they will reside in habitats with a range of different species, and they've evolved to do so, and they're fairly plastic in their adaptive capacity to reside with other species. I guess the focus is on utilising dams that best support Southern Pygmy Perch. So we would like to build up source populations so that we can quickly breed the fish up. So that'll happen in situations where predators aren't around. So we'll get larger numbers. The fish will be in better condition and therefore more suitable for translocation. So yes, whilst there are predators around and that they do live in habitats with those predators, the preference is to provide fish with perfect habitats for growth and survival and reproduction, because that gives us a greater capacity to see more populations more broadly.
The other way we could look at that, Scott, in a farm dam scenario is, could we provide some additional cover and hiding areas for these fish that turtles won't go, that gives them those safe spaces to retreat back to?
Look, I think turtles are, they're on the move quite often. So we do see them moving in and out of dams, between dams and whatnot. I don't think that they're a huge threat, particularly not to the program as it stands at the moment.
Yeah, that's great. Well, that's good. Thank you, Paul. That's a great question. I think that's it for questions. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. And as I said, please get in touch if you have a potential site and mention this program to your neighbours and friends and other landholders. And thank you, Dr. Scott, for being with us and for doing all that you do to support this program for us in Northeast Victoria. And we look forward to lots more work with you in the future, and hopefully we can get these fish doing really well in 20 or 25 dams as we'd like to see. It's fantastic. So thanks very much, and enjoy the rest of your Friday, everyone, and thanks for tuning in. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.